Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see at the center today so many things going on. We're having in this room and we're having in the other room over next door. And this is good to see more and more activity happening here. It's even simultaneously. Let us begin today's discussion. Let us begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Sri Yukteswar, great master, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. Guide us in our efforts, in all that we do. Help us to be ever in tune with thy will. Om Shanti, Shanti. Last week we began a discussion on the topic of attunement, although actually all of these weeks have been talking about attunement in one form or another, but we began addressing it more directly last week. And we also, toward the end, we introduced the topic of affirmations. You might say that affirmations are intention, or in a sense, a way that we use affirmations to get in tune. Because what we're doing when we affirm something is we're trying to put ourselves in that spot, and we're trying to attune ourselves. So it's, you might say, a method by which we help to attune ourselves. And I'd like, as I have been in all of these classes, I have been trying to think of stories that were important to Swami Kriyananda. And I think I'd like to share one with you, and I think it's the story that up until he came to India in 2003, I think it's the story he told most often. But interestingly, I think when he came to India, he told the story, but he didn't tell it nearly so often, because in that stage of his life, he was more in a, you might say, his bhav was one of sharing master, sharing joy, sharing his own devotional feelings towards the path, and sharing the tradition, but not so much, you might say, informally teaching as much, although naturally, of course, everything he said was a method of teaching. But it was a little bit different. But in his early years, when he was focusing more, you might say, on the teachings themselves and trying to transmit the teachings, just as we do in our classes of sharing the Raja Yoga traditions, I think I might classify, certainly this is in the top 5 at least of the story. And it's a story I'm sure many of you have heard, perhaps even heard Swami tell it. It's the I am a Greek story. Now, who has not heard I am a Greek? One, Akhtar, and a couple. Okay, we've got a couple, but I want to tell it again because it's instructive about what we're speaking about today. Swami says that used to say that when he was in school, college, he had a class, one of his classes was in learning Greek. Now, I don't know why he was learning Greek, but in classical education, he was learning Greek, and he was not interested in the class particularly. So he skipped many of the classes, and he even says that the teacher from time to time would make reference of how some people aren't going to be able to pass the final exam, I know, and kind of pointedly, look at Swamiji at that time. And so he had intentions to study, but it just never happened. Next week, tomorrow, those of you who've been students, you know how that is. And well, time went by, and finally the final exam was coming. And he realized he knew practically nothing. And he says, oh my God. So 1 week before the final exam, he says, I'm going to bear down, and I'm going to do this. And one day passed, and then the next day passed, and he never quite got to it. Till finally, it was a night or 2 nights before the exam, and he says, oh, I absolutely must do this. And he started to read, and to him, it was all Greek to him, and so he couldn't make it as much heads or tails out of it. And then he hit upon this thought. And he thought, I'm looking at this as an outsider to this language. And he came upon the thought that if I was Greek, this would be natural to me. And he just firmly was implanting in his mind this thought of, I am a Greek. And he just tried to imagine what it would be like to be a Greek, thought of himself as a Greek, and that it's, as a Greek, of course, I know how to speak this language. He began very, very diligently working on this, and then he was studying. And the night before the class, the final exam the next day, he opened up the Bible, which the Bible had been originally written, of course, in Greek. The apostles wrote that in Greek. So he opened up the Bible and he studied a few at random passages from the New Testament, St. John and perhaps some others, and did his best, figuring that there would probably be something from the Bible to translate. So he did his best, and he came to the exam the next day, started the exam, and lo and behold, there was those passages that he had read were part of the exam. And he was able to, and of course he had picked up a little bit of Greek in the few days that he'd been studying that time, and he had picked it up, and he did his best on the exam, and when he looked at the marks that when they were published, he saw that there were only 2 people out of that class that passed the exam, and he was one of them. Now, he was very happy. I mean, I put myself in his spot. And I thought, yes, that must have been extremely satisfying. But he told that story again and again and again. And why did he tell that story? One, it was important to him, but it particularly illustrated an important principle, or more than one, in our teachings of what Master taught and how Swami grasped Master's teachings and then passed them on and shared them with other people. Because there's 2 elements that are being particularly addressed in that story. One is affirmation and the use of those affirmations to put ourselves in tune. You see, I am a Greek. Now, Swami took that principle and he began to expand upon it in his teachings. Not only are we a Greek, but what if we were to substitute something else for that? I am a disciple. I am in tune with my guru. I am, and you fill in the blank. And he realized that principle of learning through strong affirmation in one's mind, and then attuning oneself to one's object, one's goal, you begin to naturally resonate. Now, this sounds like it perhaps, that's just luck. But this was an expression and an example that Swami referred to again and again in his life, in many times. He speaks about, and how we spoke a couple of classes ago about music, how he would draw inspiration of music and he would attune himself to various modes of music and he would draw inspiration. Now, where did that inspiration come from? It came, as he said, from the superconscious. You attune yourself to the superconsciousness and you begin to draw from that. And it's not just a matter of drawing from the superconsciousness anything. You begin to draw specifically of what you need, whether it's Greek, or in his case, drawing inspiration to sing tunes in the mode of other languages. He didn't necessarily speak those languages, but he could feel what would an ancient Egyptian be like. And he began to draw inspiration along those modes of expressing. I remember once he used to like to sing different songs from different countries that had inspired him. Romania, the Holy Land. I never heard him sing a Greek one, but maybe he could have. But Italy, Romania, India, of course, Japan, and in Mexico, and he also did one for Hawaii in the ancient native language, so to speak. He spoke no Hawaiian, but he said if they were going to sing a song, it would sound something like this. And he sang this really beautiful song, and if you didn't speak Hawaiian, you would think he was speaking Hawaiian, but it was a made-up language. He didn't know how to speak Hawaiian, so he didn't draw the actual words of Hawaiian, but he drew the feeling of it. And so he had fun in this way. And it's interesting, though, this is something that's been observed in great saints, in masters, that they, at the time of necessity, they can communicate with people in other languages even. This has been reported in Yoganandaji's life. And so it is that you're drawing, they put themselves in that framework of thought, attuned to it, and they begin to draw that inspiration down. Now, this is a very important skill, you might say, spiritual skill for the devotee, because we as a devotee particularly want to attune ourselves to the spiritual path, want to attune ourselves to the Guru, and so and thereby in attunement we begin to resonate and draw from the superconsciousness. We begin to draw those things that put us in synchronization with those. And so this is what Yogananda recommended to disciples again and again. He'd say, be in tune, or get in tune. Because in that attunement alone, they would begin to know what to do, what to say, and they would take it on. Now, there's two types of attunement. Oh, maybe that's a little simplistic. There's probably many types of attunement, but particularly they could be classified. There's passive attunement. Can anybody think of a passive attunement? Environment. Put yourself in the environment of something, or find yourself in the environment of something, and you begin to take on the qualities of that environment. Is stronger than willpower. This is why it's hammered into us again and again. We begin to attune to our environment subconsciously, passively, without even thinking about it. You begin, and Swami, what he would like to do is, he said he always noticed that when he was a young man, boy, it was very popular in America in those days in movie theaters for the movies to be cowboy movies, Western movies. And he said he always noticed that when people came out of the Western movies, they'd sort of walk kind of like they'd been riding a horse, a little bit kind of swaying back and forth as if they'd just come off a horse. And they get into the mood of what it is to be perhaps, herding cows on a horse. And so that's more of a passive thing, but we're very, very susceptible to that. Perhaps something we should be aware of, because what environment we put ourselves into, so it's not is going to influence us. So it's not just a matter of learning to attune to something positively, but it's a learning perhaps not to attune to something, because we can find ourselves in all sorts of things that we're even unaware of, attuning ourselves just by that passive engagement by environment. But it's an important point, and I think one of the marks of a devotee, particularly early, but in one's spiritual life, but really this applies always, is to learn to choose your environment wisely. Choose your environment that will help you to cooperate with what you're trying to achieve. Now, this is, of course, totally applicable to the spiritual path, but it really is choose your environment for anything. If you want to be something, you put yourself in that environment and you passively begin to attune to that. Now, choosing that environment is more than passive, because that's an active thing. We have to choose it. So it's active, but then you somewhat forget about it. You could say you can forget about it and just let yourself be in that environment. Pretty soon you become like that. Well, there's also active attunement, which means consciously trying to put ourselves into the wavelength of something else. And this, of course, is what Swami was doing when he was saying, I'm a Greek. And he began to actively think what that is. What might that be? And if you want to learn a skill of something, how can I actually begin to associate those sorts of things? And so I've made reference that in other classes to how there was, when I was younger, I saw a movie about a fellow who wanted to become a very good bicycle rider, professional, and he, at that time, the Italians were the best riders, teams. So he began to sing arias. He began to listen to opera. He began to eat Italian meals. He began to dress like a fancy Italian, and he began, you know how the Italians say anyway. He began to do everything Italian. Took on an Italian accent, and of course he was living with his family, and his family was going nuts, thinking because. And he went on this way, but I won't go into the movie. But it was humorous. It was a humorous movie. He took on to become a good bicycle racer, and he became a good bicycle racer. So this is more or less like an active thing that we can do. Well, we want to do this with our spiritual life. Now, you can do it just outwardly. And this is, of course, most people, oftentimes, they take up the spiritual life, the spiritual path, and they take on the outer trappings. That's helpful. But it's really, we know that's really something inside that we really want to do. We want to inwardly get in tune with that. And I'd like in a little while, maybe give some suggestions of what that might be. So this is something active that we can do. Now, thinking about this, you might think, a person might start to think, well, does that really have an impact? Is it just a thought? And I thought it was coincidental. Bara, who's not here today, but 2 nights ago gave our satsang, and he talked about that. He was talking about attunement also, and he gave that example of the story of the disciple. His name was Daniel Boone, was the disciple, and who replied when Master said, it's only that thought that you're not free that is keeping you from being free. And Boone said, well, Master, I wouldn't really be free if I just said I was free, would I? And Master said, well, you see, you've answered your own question. You said I wouldn't. And if we think, no, is it that simple? Is it just if I thought I was free, I would be free? And it reminded me of, I was thinking, why might that be? We have this concept, this mental, you might say, ego identity. Our ego identity is we're such and such a type of person, and we're acting from the ego. And because we're acting from the ego, we take on these different characteristics, one of which is I'm not free. I'm not free because I'm acting from an ego point of view. Now, what if you were to take that ego out of the equation? What would happen then? Well, the spiritual path is doing something quite similar to that. Now then I thought of another example, and I want to share this with you, and I've shared it in other contexts, but I thought I'm going to go look it up on the internet, and I want to read something. And I've used this example. Some of you may have been at a level 2 class years ago I would have given that I'd probably use this. I used to use this about how researchers have found that people who have personality disorders, multiple personality disorders, in one personality they have certain characteristics. When they go into a different personality, they have totally other characteristics. And it seems like that manifests itself in very different ways. And so I wanted to go and look this up, and I found a little research paper. And it sort of answers this question, are we just fooling ourselves? This isn't really true, this stuff happens. But this is a doctor, and he's writing in a research journal. Research reported over the last decade, and this was written around the turn of the century, so 1990s it would be, research reported over the last decade on some of those suffering from multiple personality disorder. What the studies report is the bona fide appearance of clinical symptoms of a particular medical ailment with the manifestation of a personality in consciousness, requiring the specific appropriate medicines and treatment to sustain function in life. All the while, the association of another state of consciousness in the same subject's mind creates an entirely different set of clinical symptoms of pathology to precipitate, and no pathology appearing whatsoever when a third state of consciousness presents in the conscious mind. Thus, a diabetic in one personality becomes a cardiac patient in another state of consciousness and shows no medical pathology at all when another schizoid fragment of consciousness presents itself through yet another state of mind. The confirmation of genuine clinical medical symptoms of disease concurrent with the specific psychological states of consciousness in the subject, demanding an understanding that supersedes the casual and common misunderstanding and misuse of the labels hypochondria in medicine and psychiatry, and further demonstrates the influence of consciousness beyond the limits of conventional mechanistic mind-body notions of causality and disease etiology. Well, that's a little complicated language, but what he is saying there is he's saying you have a patient, and this patient had 3 personalities. In the one, he was diabetic, needing to have all the insulin and all of those things. And when he shifted to another one, all of those went away. And he became a cardiac patient, needing heart problems. He was getting ready to, something to happen to him with cardiac problems. And then that would go, and there was a third one, and he didn't mention it, and I forget what it was. But there was a third state with a completely third set of problems that he was switching. Now, you can imagine how the drugs he had to keep straight for all of this. But it showed what happened was when he went into one state, he was that. When he went into another state, he was that. And he didn't remember the other. So he was totally into it. So if you think of Master saying, if you can totally convince yourself that you are one thing or another, you're not telling yourself, I wouldn't really be that, would I? Because this person's ego had disappeared. You might say he had 3 egos. Don't ask me. I don't know. I don't know how that works. But he completely switched. And when he completely went into the new frame of mind, everything, physical body, everything conformed to it. Now, I find that very, very fascinating. And this is in a sense of what we're trying to do also, is we're trying to say, I am free. I am a disciple. I'm a guru. I'm a guru's disciple. And we're trying to rid ourselves of all of those things that limit us and prevent us from being that in reality. So it's not simply that little, it's not it's not something that we're fooling ourselves in. You say, oh, I'm just convincing myself. The danger in all of this, and the big thing that we have to learn to overcome, is those little words that come in. Yes, but I'm really not free, am I? And when and immediately you see you're in that state, that other part, that ego state that's watching you make these affirmations. Oh, that's who I am. But if we continue again and again, we keep repeating, we keep affirming, we keep demonstrating it and making it into our life, we begin to take on that quality. And I suspect we can do this in many ways we have not even thought about. I've noticed, Hatha yoga, for instance, I bet some people come to Hatha yoga classes and they probably are stiff. They can't bend. I bet if they were to convince themselves and put that personality aside, they could probably go perfectly into it. I remember I had an experience many years ago. I'm, as you know, not a great Hatha yogi, but once, now there was once I was meditating, and I went into quite a deep state of meditation. Very, very still, very, very calm. And I just had this impulse. I was in a chair. I had this impulse to sit on the floor. I sat on the floor, and in that state, I could sit in the lotus posture. Now, I don't sit in the lotus posture, but I could stay there. I lasted about 10, 15 minutes. Then my knees started asserting themselves. But then I thought, now that was interesting, because you get into attunement with a certain state of consciousness, a meditative state of consciousness, and so naturally the body takes a state that's supportive of that. And that's why Siddhasana, Padmasana, these sorts of things are recommended, because by putting yourself physically in those, you start to induce that state that's associated with it. So the two go together. And so consequently, when we try to attune ourselves, we want to put ourselves, you might say, from the outside, stimulating what the inner state really is. And of course, with Swami, we have the attitudes and everything, those affirmations added to it. It puts us into attunement with those, and then physically we use the body to be able to also attune to that and stimulate that state of mind. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to attune. And at the same time, we're affirming a reality, a potential, a higher reality. So when you say, I am free, I am peaceful, I am calm, that's a higher reality that is a truth. Because in our higher superconscious self, those are true. We are free. And so consequently, we're trying to put ourselves in association with that, and little by little, we begin to take on those qualities. And so this is what Swami was emphasizing. He said, attunement is a skill, something that we can do. And I think what we should do is, if all of us are trying to be attuned in the highest sense of the word, or in the expression, attuned with Master, attuned with God, so on, and we start and we try, but I think it's helpful to start on a lower level, something maybe a little bit more closer to where we're at right now. And so I think we should practice being in tune. Just like Swami expressed it in many different ways in his life, practice attuning with something. Or like we used the language from last week, practice putting yourself in harmony with something, or putting yourself in harmony with the state of consciousness, or with some outward form, perhaps some skill, something you like to do, that perhaps you like to cook, or perhaps whatever. I'm a baker. I'm a really great baker, And then what does it take to use practical things in life to do that? And I think you'll start to see, and to contact those inner skills of what does it take for us to be able to do that. It takes concentration. It takes active will. It takes the ability to make a choice in life, to be conscious of what we're doing, and to shift our awareness into a different state. Now, why might we want to do this? Well, there's the obvious. We want to achieve these states. But just as important is the skill needed to be able to withdraw from the state that we are attuning ourselves to right now. Now, people say, well, I don't really like to practice affirmations. I never do them. And I don't see why I should. But my counter is, what do you mean you never do them? You're doing, you are doing them every day. You are affirming a reality right now. Perhaps not consciously. Some people are consciously trying to do certain things, and you're going off in that direction. But most people, you are affirming a reality, and you think it is you. You've defined yourself. That's who I am. So what we learn to do is says, now wait a minute, I can be that, and I can be this, I can do these other things too. And you begin to realize, yes, I'm not that. I'm not that. And pretty soon you realize you can be many things. Now there's a certain innate qualities that you brought with you from past lifetimes, but even those ultimately are not really who you are either, because we're only one thing, and we're that divine self, that higher self. And yes, every individual has their own individuality and expresses in their own way, but I think you understand what I mean. These superficial things are not who we really, really are. Now, that's one thing that we could do. Another thing is to help us to disassociate ourselves from the things we are attuning ourselves to and that we're affirming ourselves already, is what Lahiri Mahashaya recommended. And he said, and Swami, of course, said this many times too. He said, at nighttime, mentally build a fire. In your meditation at night, build a fire and mentally throw everything into the fire. That's a nice thought. But if you take that seriously, what we're doing is we're saying, I'm not this, I'm not all those desires, put them in the fire. All of those worries and attachments, and throw them in the fire. And what we're really doing is we're just freeing ourselves from those. Now, it's also said that what we should do is take it a little bit step further. Remember, and I think it was Master who said this. But he said, remember, you're going to sleep tonight. There's no guarantee you're going to wake up in this body tomorrow morning. It might be the last day of your life. You're never going to get up again in this body. He says, why not? If that's the case. He says, now some people might say, oh, wait a minute, stop right there. That's morbid. That's morbid. That's a morbid thought. No, it's really actually kind of it's a freeing thought. I'm not this body. Am I prepared right now to give it up? What if a car might hit me down, crossing the road right out here in the middle of the weekend? Who knows what's going to happen? So every night, same thing. What is holding me? What is holding me? That project I want to finish, it's so important. Or is it, the attachments that we have, the marriage I'm supposed to be at next Sunday? Show up for? What is it that's we've got here in our minds? Now, not to make it morbid though, but really, it's God's world. This body here is God's body in this form on loan to me. What if I have to cash it in? And in that way, you slowly just can start to free yourself of that. So that's another way, just letting go of that. But I think also coming back to the affirmation side of it, we need to be able to do anything, to align ourselves to something. This is the positive side of trying to attune ourselves. We have to be able to choose to do that, to actually choose to do something. And this is, I think, really the foundation when a person comes on to the spiritual life, takes up the spiritual life, is through meditation, through our activities, is learning to be conscious, to be able to make a choice of what I intend to do. Now, this I is an ego I, you see, at this point. But the ego I must be made strong. Not in an egotistical way, but people without a strong will not be successful on the spiritual path. To just go by passive attunement Well, what if the environment changes? Next thing you're off doing something else in the new environment. You have to have will. And this is why Master starts in his lessons with the concept of will. We have to have the will, which by implication is the power to choose, to be conscious, to make a free choice, and then to act on that free choice. And that's what, if we start there, and then what am I going to use my will for? What am I going to choose? Your environment, because of attunement and the influence it'll have, and my inner life, my inner environment, not just outward, my inner environment, and I'm going to affirm a reality. Now, this is when sometimes people say, why should I say these affirmations? And it's because you have, the affirmations are an expression, true spiritual affirmations, not I want to be a good cook, but the spiritual ones, they really are an expression of superconsciousness. If you say, I want to be free, that's a superconscious reality. If I want to be kind and sympathetic, those are the expressions of love, which are superconscious realities. So we want to attune ourselves to a higher reality is by first affirming it, then living it to the degree that we can live it, until ultimately we make it mine, and we eliminate that, yes, but I'm really not that at all, because that's who we really are. And what we really need in order to be successful on this is we need to have a little bit of experience. Because if we practice and we meditate, and then we have a little bit of experience of what does joy feel like? I'm joy. What does freedom feel like? Then we can recall and say, that's who I am. And we begin to associate and bring ourselves into attunement with that. So I'm going to finish with an affirmation. I want us to repeat this affirmation together. I didn't tell one story I wanted to tell. This is one you all know. But it's like, no. I'll save it for another time. Let's do, this is one of my favorites, and Dhyana does this all the time. And I like it's one of Master's affirmations. It's not the whole thing, but it's sort of the essential part of it. And when we do affirmations, what we do is we start by saying them loudly with our conscious, to embed them in the conscious mind, just to really get them in there, make them our reality. And then it's a little bit, a little bit slower, a little more quiet and more quiet, until ultimately we put them in the superconscious mind. So you can actually, Dhyana has done this so many times at our various workshops, and I always mentally channel her when I say this. So, but let's say this together, and we'll say it and try to make this a reality. And during the day, you can take just even one or two of these lines and just repeat it in yourself over and over again. And I find it brings great strength, is what I get out of this. A certain strength of, you might say, straight backbone type of strength, that going forward as a courageous spiritual warrior to take on the challenges of the spiritual life. So please repeat after me. I am brave, I am strong.
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 Perfume of success thought.
Perfume of success thought.
Blows in me, blows in me.
Blows in me, blows in me.
I am brave, I am strong.
I am brave, I am strong.
Perfume of success thoughts.
Perfume of success thought.
Blows in me, blows in me.
Blows in me, blows in me.
I am cool, I am calm.
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 I am sweet, I am kind.
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 I am love, I am sympathy.
I am love, I am sympathy.
I am love, I am sympathy.
I am love,
I am charming and magnetic.
I am charming and magnetic.
I am pleased with all.
I am pleased with all.
I wipe away the tears and fears of all.
I wipe away the tears and fears of all.
I wipe the tears and fears of all.
I wipe the tears and fears of all.
I have no enemy.
I have no enemy.
I am the friend of all.
I am the friend of all.
I am love, I am sympathy.
I am love, I am sympathy.
I am charming and magnetic.
I am charming and magnetic.
I am pleased with all.
I am pleased with all.
I wipe the tears and fears of all.
I wipe the tears and fears of all.
I have no enemy.
I have no enemy.
I am the friend of all.
I am the friend of all.
I have no habits.
I have no habits.
I am free. I am free.
I am free.
I
free.
I am free.
I am free.
I am free.
I am free.
I can do everything.
I can do everything.
When so I think.
When so I think.
When so I think.
When so I think.
I can do everything.
I can do everything.
When so I think.
When so I think.
I am brave. I am strong.
I am brave. I am strong.
Perfume of success thoughts
Perfume of success thought
blows in me, blows in me.
blows in me, blows in me.
I am cool. I am calm.
I am cool. I am calm.
I am sweet. I am kind.
I am sweet. I am kind.
I am love. I am sympathy.
I am love. I am sympathy.
I am charming and magnetic.
I am charming and magnetic.
I am pleased with all.
I am pleased with all.
I wipe the tears and fears of all.
I wipe the tears and fears of all.
I have no enemy.
I have no enemy.
I am the friend of all.
I am the friend of all.
I have no habits.
I have no habits.
I can do everything.
I can do everything.
When so I think.
When so I think.
When so I think.
So I think.
Now let's implant this. We're going to whisper this deeply into the mind. I am brave. I am strong. Perfume of success thoughts blows in me, blows in me. I am cool. I am calm. I am sweet. I am kind. I am charming and magnetic. I am pleased with all. I wipe the tears and fears of all. I have no enemy. I am the friend of all. I have no habits. I am free. 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 I can do everything. When so I think. When so I think. Now let's hold that in our mind's eye. Feel that to be true. It is true. It is who we are. We are brave. We are strong. Perfume of success thoughts blows in me. I'm cool. I'm calm. I'm sweet. I am kind. I am love. I am sympathy. I am charming and magnetic. I am pleased with all. I wipe the tears and fears of all. I have no enemy. I am the friend of all. I have no habits. I am free. I am free. I can do everything when so I think. When so I think. I am free. I am free. Om Shanti Shanti. Now I invite any questions that you might have. Somebody wrote in a question? What? Philosopher and their saint. Well, a philosopher is the love of knowledge, and of course a saint is one who has experienced true knowledge. But so in a sense, you might even say a saint is one who expresses through their very being what true knowledge really is, whereas a philosopher is one who contemplates it. And I think that's probably something along those lines. Any further questions? Yes, sir. Why we choose freedom? Why should you choose freedom? I think probably, let's take the opposite. The question is, why should we choose freedom? One, I think freedom's blissful, probably more blissful than not being free. And I think when we're not free, I think after a period of time, it's like being in prison, where a time will come where you're comfortable with that prison, but you want to know what's on the other side of the wall. And I think the human being is programmed that way, to want to expand. Whenever there's a sense of expansion of going on the other side of that wall, an expansion of knowledge, an expansion of breaking of limitations to go outward, it's built into the framework of the universe that expansion is accompanied by a feeling of joy and bliss. Bliss is something that is never ending. It's ever new bliss, and so it's the ultimate quest for all of us to find that bliss. And when we're bound, whatever the satisfactions that are in a bound state, and there are many. I mean, we've spent lifetimes, how many lifetimes in a bound state? There are things that we can explore, and we continue to explore them, and we will explore them. We do explore them. That's what we're doing. But there does come a time when you no longer want to explore anymore. You want to know what's on the other side, and you keep on going, and till you can find that. Eventually, it's natural to us, because human consciousness, as human consciousness awakens, we become self-aware of our state of limitation. It's just something that happens naturally. You could say Sri Yukteswar even took it to the point, says this happens naturally with the rise of the yugas, just by passive environment of being in a cosmos or in a solar system that's expanding in consciousness. And as that consciousness begins to expand naturally, simply through the influence of the planets and our place in the universe, as that happens, general consciousness begins to awaken, and people become, oh my gosh. It's like you wake up one day and everything was fine. You were enjoying your life. But sooner or later, you wake up one day and you look, wow, is this it? Is this it? There's got to be something more. And I think it's that natural awakening of curiosity, of wanting something more, that is the way that the universe is built. The desire to, you could say, maybe in physics, I'm jumping into unknown territory because I don't know. But let's say the Big Bang. They say this universe started with some Big Bang, whatever that is. But it's associated with expansion. So you could say the very material universe is there's expansion in it, and that's the direction it goes. And it's, in a sense, it's in our nature for consciousness also to expand as it accompanies that expansion. So I think it's just kind of how we're built. Anyway, sure you can.
If we want to practice affirmations for the healing of some other
Now I never even got onto that, did I? Yeah, but
I just want to ask you that.
that's absolutely right. If well, affirmations, of course, is you are building up the affirmation of putting yourself in attunement to the point where then you can influence other people. Now, to ask for that other person's upliftment is more of a prayer than an affirmation, and that is something. Well, that's another topic entirely. But that is useful. But if to affirm that you can be a channel for God's grace, to be able to affirm that you're a clear channel to be God's power flows through me, blows through me. God's power can flow through me, and then you can channel that for good for others as well. And so you could certainly, but prayer, I would start with that, particularly for other, in conjunction, praying for the other person, that God's power work for that person directly, not necessarily through you as a channel, because I think it's better if God use you, if that be God's will. When we ask that God make us a channel, I think you also need to accompany that with a prayer that you be a pure channel for that, because you don't know what the God's will is for another person. So ask God to channel that healing directly to that person. And of course, we always do this. We send healing vibrations, flow through us, heal that person according to thy will. And I think this is, you might say, the affirmation prayer that we should always send out to other people for whatever body, mind, or soul. I'm going to leave it at that. So thank you all for coming today. And go out with God's grace and blessings with you, and try to take these principles and put them into practice in the coming, take something specific in the coming days, in the coming week, and try to think, I'm going to affirm something. So many blessings, and thank you, God and Gurus, for being with us today. Om Guru.